today. They are alumni of the College of Education, and we are excited to celebrate them as award winners. Our event is tonight, and we are going to bestow some really distinguished awards to them. So welcome Jenny Arndt, Sharita Ware, Jason Ware, and Kay Hayes. As we go through the panel, they can tell a little bit more about themselves. Okay, so Kay, would you tell us a little bit about you and your history and your journey through Purdue?
Okay. Well, I am a retired elementary classroom teacher. I retired after 42 years of teaching in the Maryland public school system, Carroll County. And I spent 30 years teaching 1st through 4th grade. Mixed it up to keep me kind of fresh, sometimes requested to move to help out a situation, but it actually, I think, made me a better teacher. And then after 30 years, I decided I'll go into administration. And we needed administrators at that time. So I spent the last 12 years being an assistant principal in 2 different schools. One was had a population of about 750. And my last one had about 400 students. So basically, I have lived, loved being a teacher, and I promote education. I think the children gave me the power to be a positive person, and I have enjoyed my retirement now, but I still love being back at Purdue. It's like I've come full circle. When I was here 50-some years ago, I graduated in 1972. We didn't even have a college of education. We had, I was under the umbrella of humanities and I think social science, and I feel like we are very special. And I would love to see us continue promoting and being the positive, very qualified teachers that Purdue puts out into our communities.
Thank you. Jason, we'll go to you and have you kind of tell us about yourself and your journey through Purdue.
All right, good morning, and thank you to everybody for being here. As mentioned, my name is Jason Ware, and my journey through the College of Education, I suppose, is a little different than maybe the rest of the panel in the sense that I never did teach within K-12. I didn't graduate from teacher education at Purdue, so my degrees from the College of Education are a master's degree and a PhD in curriculum studies. In fact, 2/5 or half of my committee is in the room, which is kind of cool. Very helpful for me during that journey, but I was a banker, and so my career path was definitely non-linear. I was a banker for 9 years before I came to Purdue for a master's and a PhD. However, I will say that I did spend quite a bit of my undergraduate journey within the College of Education. So that teacher education program, I just didn't finish that. I'll say that after a few internships as an undergrad in corporate America, I decided I didn't want to work in corporate America. I wanted to have a different kind of impact. I wanted to be impactful and be able to make a difference in the world in a different kind of a way. But I will say that once upon a time I was ashamed of this fact, but I just realized that life unfolds in unique ways and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. But I decided to not go the path of teacher education because I had this sort of monetary goal, and I imagined that I was wrong, but I imagined that I wouldn't be able to live a certain way, and so I went the corporate America route anyway. I enjoyed it, had some success, but ultimately was unfulfilled and recognized that for many reasons I wanted to take a different path. So then when I came to Purdue, I started in CTE, Career Technical Education, I was in that program for 1 summer. And then I took a course that was taught by then Eric Molesky, and I realized, nope, I need to do something else. I wanted to do something else. And so my journey through the college of education was through graduate school. And I was in curriculum studies, that was my field, that's where my PhD was from. And while I certainly do value public school, because I'm married to an amazing public school educator, I 100% do value public school. My dissertation was basically a service learning project within public schools, and I became very discouraged by what I was seeing in terms of how students who look like me, I'll just say I was challenged by what I was seeing in public schools. So I turned my focus to the communities where they live. So focusing on informal learning spaces and communities as being a pretty significant educator and certainly transformative in terms of how young people grow up and see themselves as learners. So most of my research has been in, I didn't say this, but I'm a clinical associate professor in the Honors College here at Purdue, and I have what do we call this? Courtesy appointment. And so I typically teach, I have taught mostly graduate level research courses, but occasionally, like right now, I'm teaching an undergraduate course. It's EDCI 285, which is multicultural education. But most of my research with students, because I'm really passionate about developing undergraduate scholars, is in the informal learning context within communities. So.
Excellent, thank you. Sharita?
Well, I'm Sheree Ware, Jason's wife, and I am in my 13th year teaching engineering education. I teach at East Tip Middle School, Typical New School Corporation, so that's in the northeast part of the county, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I kind of too have a very unique path. I came to Purdue as a freshman in 1989. Started in engineering, didn't do so well. And at the time, I think it was called the College of Technology, School of Technology. I don't know, it's had 3 different names over the course. So, and industrial engineering technology. And so I worked in industry for a number of years. And then when we got married, I stayed home with our kids for 9 years. And I wanted to do something purposeful, meaningful, because I felt like, stay at home and do what when the kids are at school most of the day. And in my inbox, I saw this transition to teaching for STEM fields. And so I just, kind of just on a chance did it. And here we are 13 years later, and I'm still teaching. And I absolutely love it because it's all of the things that I like to do. I like to nurture. I love engineering, and I love to be super creative. And you need to do all of those things in the classroom. I think a similar story in my mostly just feeding off of my educational experience, being a quiet brown girl. I did my work. I did really well at my work, so I was largely ignored in the classroom. And so just remembering those experiences, just wanting to make every child feel like they're important, regardless of, whoever they are. And I think I have been able to do that, and it's been super rewarding. And I always leave this part off, so I will say it. Indiana's 2022 Teacher of the Year. I say that because I think it speaks to the fact that, someone saw the work that I was doing, and with 63,000 plus teachers in Indiana, I'm not going to pretend like I'm the best by any means. I just happen to be seen in that year, and so it's an opportunity for me to be a voice for other teachers that maybe look like me, teachers that teach the same subject as me, which doesn't get a lot of love either, but so it's been a great opportunity to share my experiences in that way as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Jenny, tell us about your journey through Purdue.
Oh, wow. Let's see. Again, a little bit non-traditional path to teaching. I started in a little bit like what you said, Jason. I said to my parents, I want to be a teacher. And my dad said, you can't just be a teacher. So it kind of went through college, really wanting to be a teacher, but my dad's was like ringing in my ear. And then, I don't know, whatever his deal was. So all three of my older siblings are all corporate executives. So I suppose that's what he wanted all four of us to be, but he dropped the ball with me, I guess, or I didn't listen too well. So I went into Peace Corps and they assigned me to be a teacher. And of course I loved it, right? So I was ESL and I was teaching with underprivileged young women in Morocco, where they would have, all the boys would always get teachers, and then it always had a hole because no one wanted to teach the girls because they were supposed to grow up to be, domestic help. And so that was a perfect role for a Peace Corps teacher because it was a place where the country wasn't serving. So I didn't displace any jobs, which was always important to me too, but filled the hole where there wasn't one. And my husband and I came back to Purdue came to Purdue from the Peace Corps, and I was already a teacher. So then I went into the College of Ed, and I already had one master's degree in another subject, and I was like, okay, I have to do another master's degree, and then I have to do my teaching license, and now we have the transition. Back then you didn't, you start over. So it was either get a PhD or get a teaching license. I was like, well, I'm not gonna be a legit teacher until I get licensed, so bite the bullet, just get it done. And I did, and then I taught for 2 years at Lafayette. Jeff or Jason said we overlapped there, which we didn't know, which is fun. And I became a teacher of special needs, learning disability, mild amount of handicap, and then, these are probably old terms by now, and then eventually I came back and got behavior disorder or emotionally. Went away to postdoc. My husband got his PhD while I was doing all my stuff. Had 3 kids, busy years. Then came back to Purdue. He became a professor, and I just started adding more degrees, licensure fields onto my previous degree until one of the faculty members said, Jenny, you've been around here a long time. I'm like, yeah, a little bit. And I was teaching undergrad classes, and she said, 10 more classes on dissertation, you have a PhD. And I will admit to being a woman of a certain age who needed to be encouraged because I never saw, I thought, well, my husband has a PhD. I mean, this is sexist stuff, but not me. And it was a really rock star of Babcock. She said, smacked me upside the head and said, you stupid, of course you can do a PhD. So I did. And then we moved to Mozambique with my husband's job. And again, you're in the position of traveling spouse, So I eventually ended up being the middle school principal and IB implementer at a K-12 school for the American International School there. And then wanting to be a faculty member somewhere, threatening to leave my family and move back to the United States. My husband said, don't do that. So, well, I'm not going to work at some crappy online, which is exactly what I did way before online was cool, but I did it to keep my family together. And then I got a job at Walden University, and we started the first teacher preparation program in special needs for master's students. And we took it straight through. I got to write the curriculum, teach in that program. And we were the first online accredited by NK teacher prep program. And then I got to be on the board of examiners, so that I was going around the country being an accreditor for their online programs because they were new and some of them were really terrible and taking advantage of students and taking their money. And so it was a strange journey in education for me. But I think about every day how my education here has helped me in my work now. That's a different subject.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing so much about yourselves and how you got to Purdue in maybe non-traditional ways. What advice would you give to people who are maybe interested in education and giving them advice on their opportunities to come to Purdue, and then what can they do after they leave? Because we know not everyone is in a classroom teaching. Give some advice to the young people that are interested in education.
I'll just jump in and say that there are so many, and this, I don't know how this is going to be perceived, but the whole journey of sort of traveling through your degree program or teacher education program and the skills that so I guess what I'm going to say is I'm thinking from the skills perspective. The skills are, and this might seem exaggerated, but I don't, think it is. When you are an educator, whether it's K-12 or even within a university context, but I am thinking K-12, you absolutely have to be visionary. And I know visionary itself, being a visionary isn't a skill, I suppose that's a description, but visionary in the sense that you have these learners who enter your classroom, or you're preparing for these learners that enter your classroom. And you have to have big picture vision of what you want for them in terms of they come in, I'll just say, at point A, and perhaps your goal is to take them to multiple points, but point B, and there you have to be able to see this is where you need them to be, where you want them to be, and not just from a content perspective, but they're developing humans, so there's all these other variables that you are going to be part of, inputting in terms of their development. So this vision, and not just for one person, but for 25 to 30 other humans in the classroom. And so you have to be able to have this vision, but then also think about and plan for and create this environment that takes them through these activities and these learning experiences that are equipping them to sort of, I'll just put in air quotes, master, or at least learn and explore this content, which is loaded with ideas and concepts and behavior, all this stuff. You have to all along the way assess them and give them feedback, and so the skills that are associated with that, you need those in the classroom, but if you start thinking about influence, if you start thinking about planning, if you start thinking about measurement and assessing, all of those types of skills are extremely transferable to other roles. Fill in the blank what you want those other roles to be. I'm thinking leadership, I'm thinking management, I'm thinking other things that involve planning. They're interacting with all these other humans in their classroom. And as educators, we're in liminal spaces, so you're learning from them. You may be the content expert, but you're learning from them as well. And so there's this interpersonal connection that you're having with multiple humans. Of course, if they're K-12, you're also dealing with their parents, which is not always pleasant. And so the interpersonal skills, right? The writing skills, the oral communication. So my point is so many skills that you're going to be very well, when you leave Purdue with the K-12, with the license, or hopefully with the license, but with that education, you're going to be so well equipped to do so many other things. I mentioned that I was a banker. I can't tell you the number of my colleagues within the bank who had previously been educators. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think the types of skills that you obtain just make you well suited to do that kind of thing. Not just that kind of thing, but so I know I didn't specifically answer your question. I just think that there are lots of skills that you can leave a teacher education program with that would allow you to do multiple things.
I think being a great planner, being prepared, but also being very flexible. Especially in K-12, the secondary part where, your world is changing like every 45, every 50 minutes. And it's a lot like, I used to work for a large, when I was in the industry before having children, a news company, and the news is just always changing. You have to be on your toes, be ready to move, and it's the same way in the classroom. You're dealing with different learners, you're dealing with all kinds of different home situations, you're dealing with parents, and you may have someone approaching you in a way that is very not okay, but you have to respond back in a way that's very professional and not triggering. And I learned that, very quickly. And one of the things, and one of the best pieces of advice my current principal gave me is when sometimes a parent is just expressing their frustration about how their child's behaving. and so if they don't specifically ask a question, you're just listening. And you'd respond back, thank you for your words, and I will work with so-and-so to hopefully improve, and it de-escalates. And the first couple of times I was trying to fix the situation, and that didn't go well. So so one of the things I would say again, those interpersonal skills, and I guess one of the things I've noticed with even some student teachers I've had over the years is, having your content knowledge is absolutely wonderful and necessary, but come into the experience knowing that you have so much to learn, that the kids and especially at the middle school, I imagine high school might be similar. They can sniff out someone that thinks they know it all and talks very kind of condescending. They will conspire together to destroy you.
Yes.
I saw it happen with one student teacher I had, and no matter what I tried to do to try to say, hey, maybe you should approach the kids in this way. Maybe you should try this. And I hadn't had this happen before then. I literally had to stay in the classroom. I never could leave. That's how bad it got. But so just being prepared, but being flexible for the astronomical amount of changes that will happen. You might be in the hallway hugging someone whose grandparent just died or parents are divorcing. And then the next minute you may be in the lab helping them use the bandsaw, and you might be coaxing someone out from underneath the desk, down on the floor saying, hey, come out from underneath there, it's gonna be okay. So many hats that you will have to wear, and being flexible, and that they are people too. You are in a position of leadership and authority in your classroom, but never forget that your students are people too.
I love that. I love that. When I taught 20 years ago, we did life skills, and the life skill of flexibility was my favorite life skill. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Even the youngest child knows if you're genuine. It is so important to make that connection, and that each child comes to you with gifts to share. And you have to keep a positive spirit, even on one of the worst days where you just feel like, oh my gosh, they have taken every ounce of energy from me. The best part of, I think, being a teacher is you go home, you get rejuvenated, you meet with your family, you kind of just regroup, and the next day you start clean. You got a brand new day. And sometimes I found through years, you have to be prepared, because if you are not on your game, it doesn't take long to lose the crowd. So being prepared is very important. And I did a lot of mentoring new teachers too, and sometimes I had teams of 7 teachers. And I probably was one of the last ones to leave, because I think collaborating with each other, collaboration is very, very important. And we all want to be successful. So, I think as a person, it's important to give of yourself too. Not just to the teacher, to the students, but also to your teammates. So I think it's such a rewarding job, and unfortunately, it's not on the high, I want to be a teacher list of jobs right now, but I think it should be, and it could be. And I think we have to think about how important our society needs good teachers. And I think Purdue did prepare me. I think it gives you when I was here 50 some years ago, I had hands-on science classes. I was asked to use manipulatives with, engaged learning in math. I went through so many literature books to figure out what book would go with what kind of teaching, what subject. And teaching reading is key. And I guess I spent most of my time teaching 1st and 2nd grade. And it's so important to know where your student is and how you can get them from this point to the next point, always thinking about comprehension. Because I think our former Dean Nancy, I talked to her one time, and when she was interviewed here, I think Mitch Daniels or one of the people on the board asked her, what is your definition of social justice? And she said that all children can read. And I thought that was pretty powerful. And that's our mission as teachers, that we want everyone to have the ability to do and be whatever they want to be in society. And I agree. You can use your skills in other fields. I've known a lot of teachers that have left and have gone into the corporate world. It's kind of like the military. They see you as someone that has been very diverse in your field, and they know that you're a worker and that you can do the job for them. We all can be trained.
Thank you.
Yeah, those are all great. Now I serve as an elected official, and I just, on Tuesday, finished my 6th election. So it's been 10 years I've been doing this. And, you know, that grounding in education and being a teacher, Bev Cox again, we're talking about getting the school ready getting the kids ready for school. There's a school readiness movement. And she looked at me, she said, you know, school really is the one that needs to get ready for the kids. And her, you know, a simple flip, but the idea is you serve every single student, no matter what they come or bring. And it's incumbent upon us to reach them, not for them to come with a set of skills when they're like 4 or 5. They're coming from all different backgrounds and ideas and abilities and issues. So that really helped my thinking, right? So in electoral politics, you are grounded in what people bring, and it is the ultimate inequality, right? Everyone has the same vote. So you get to use that mindset of how it really is the people and all their gifts and talents coming together, right? Those sorts of notions have been impactful to me in my life and how I do the work I do now, and I feel like it's been in a world where teaching is really hard, being a politician's also hard. It's not people's favorite person in the room ever. I accept that. But the idea that everyone has an equal voice and then we all get to do this together has what I think has made be able to pass bills in the General Assembly in 100-0. We're not that different. We really aren't. And we need people need to understand that. So it's a neat, it's an absolute, and then I would say, you mentioned it, Jason, standing up in front of people, or I would say sitting in a circle with them, joining them in their journey, helps your oral presentation skills. And you don't get a lot of practice in that in other jobs, right? And then when you said, Sharika, about them being able to sniff you out, authenticity, honestly, is everything. In being a teacher and being what I do. Yeah, you can't. Don't fake it. People are smart. So those are some of the skills that I think teaching helps.
Good, thank you. I want to open it up to anyone if you have questions. Any questions from the room, online?
And online attendees, please feel free to submit questions in the chat and I'll pass them along.
Okay, so as we've talked about, I was speaking to Jason about our kids. My kids had the pleasure of having Sharita as a teacher, and my kids know their children. We were talking about post-COVID and how kids are kind of experiencing life, how they're experiencing schools. How are teachers experiencing the environment that they're in post-COVID? We've got, you know, new online opportunities to teach and train. Kind of go down that road and give us your thoughts on children post-COVID in the education realm and even teachers and all of the opportunities. I call them the silver linings that we're finding post-COVID. We can do online and in person. We've got hybrid going on. So just kind of your thoughts post-COVID, how are children and educators handling it?
I think initially, you know, being somewhat hopeful, I think there's, I guess what you would say, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. And I'll start off with the good, the online piece. Our TSC students have been one-to-one for I don't even know how many years, for quite some time. But we've never really taken advantage of the online component, really. And so when COVID happened, the transition for us wasn't as difficult because most of the students outside of the elementary students already had their own computers. And so I started making, videos of, building rockets and making airplanes and Rube Goldberg machines. And that was probably the most exciting for me because, the kids in class, I gave them a 12 by 12 inch platform. When we were, during COVID, they were taking up their whole dining room and whole kitchen, building these awesome Rube Goldberg machines. And so that element, I think, has stayed in the sense of the videos that I built during that time, kids that are absent. I've had students that totally teach themselves CAD based off, computer-aided design from the videos I created. And so those, or I'm teaching in class and they struggle and they need to go back and review, they can go back and look at those videos where before I was only teaching them, how to design in CAD during class time. So that's been a bonus. The one thing I have noticed is my current 6th and 7th graders were 2nd and 3rd graders. And I'm noticing the comprehension piece, the writing is very much still elementary schools looking even. Really large kind of blocky letters for a lot of the kids and using what I would call academic words for someone in 6th and 7th grade. They're like, what does that mean? So I find that I'm still using academic words, but in parentheses, I'll put, so I think that's the bad and the bad portion of it, that there's a deficit for sure.
Yeah.
But as an educator, just recognizing that there is a deficit and doing what you can to try to fill in the gap. The ugly part is the limited, I think, in long suffering with each other. So quick to, when there's a bad situation, to just think the worst of a human being. So as a teacher, if there's a negative situation between between a teacher and a child, the parent goes for the juggler, you just don't care for my child, you don't understand my child. Where it's like, it's not that at all. So I think just the patience and grace, I guess, doesn't seem to be that, it's just very short in the sense of, being patient with each other. So I'm hoping that over time, as teachers, again, building trust and positive communication will help with that.
That's great. Anyone else?
I just like the word trust. I think we have lost some of that trust.
Yeah, I would agree. So Purdue's College of Education has a newer program. We're in our 3rd year here in I2, and student teaching is going from just a semester to a year long. Just from, your information, from your experiences, do you think that's going to be a huge benefit? Do you think give us your thoughts on that.
Well, I've always thought, I was a teacher I kept trying to make it longer, those field experiences, but also, and I mentioned a little this morning, I also think it should be paid. There should be a stipend. I see it as a fundamental inequality to say, you need to work here for a year for free. I know you're in the learning mentor mode, I can understand that, and I love the apprentice model. I love that, and there's master teachers, absolutely, and we need to take advantage without losing them. I like administrators too, but like if you're a master math teacher, I would like to keep you where your expertise is and then leverage that for the next generation. That so many times the career path in education is then administration and so on, which takes you out of what you were actually really fantastic at. So, and I understand where the challenge is in the pay model. I get that. Who's going to do it, right? But principals used to come to me and say, I have one of your graduates and they're just not good. I go, well, are they just not good for a novice, or are they just not good as a master teacher? And they go, well, as a master teacher. I go, yeah, well, it's a novice. Like where the university leaves off, school corporation need to pick up, because you're not a master carpenter. right out of college,
Mhm.
right? So I believe in that sort of graduated mass apprenticeship model, but I also feel for the people who just can't afford to spend a whole year, and then they're working another job at night, and it's very challenging.
Well, which they ask you not to do.
Right.
Some people don't have a choice. I know for me, my transition to teaching was a little bit different. So I was through the Woodrow Wilson STEM Goes Rural program. And I got a pretty significant stipend to make that transition, a year-long master's program through Purdue and again, the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. So I think that was very helpful because again, you're paying for that experience, but don't have income. And sometimes some people have to move to a different location or, just the driving alone back and forth is an expense. And so that was very helpful for us. Maybe the time for me, I was married and, wasn't the only income, but again, it helped, with the daycare, it helped with, a lot of the living expenses that were necessary because I was in school. My program was a year long. The first semester was just me going out, I think, 3 times a week and again, helping with lessons, participating in clubs, the robotics team. And then the second semester was full on, me teaching in the classroom.
Okay.
But I think the stipend pay, however you want to word it, would be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
But it was also nice, like you said, you had that first semester, so it was definitely more than a semester.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. And it helped me get familiar with the school,
Right.
with the kids, with the teacher I was working with, because that was an adjustment.
Mhm.
So.
As I mentioned, I didn't do K-12.
Right.
But in grad school, one of the first publications was, one of our tasks was to evaluate teacher education programs and sort of how they were dealing with social justice. But one of this book chapter, Luciana's text, was, as we evaluated these teacher education programs, that we thought that definitely it would be beneficial in a structured way if students could spend more time in the classroom than just a semester. So we were definitely advocating for that. But I don't know if this is separate. I should know this considering I'm actually here at Purdue. But I know that you have the community-based. Is that separate from I2?
It's part of it.
Okay, well, we were definitely big advocates for that.
Yeah.
I said that I do most of my research on the community side of things, and so I see that as really important. That was one of the things we wrote about in this particular chapter, was that it's important for students to become not embedded, but to be immersed in the context where, they could potentially be teaching, so they understand these various influences on like learner identity and all of that, and just be connected to the communities and the families. So I'm a big fan of the community-based piece, in addition to them having more time in a classroom. I think that's wonderful. I guess you could totally dismiss my perspective because I haven't taught in K-12, but I think
Yeah, great.
I agree. I had student teachers in Maryland, depending on the college they came from. The best experience is when you open the classroom. They learn that. That is a whole nother level of what a teacher needs to do to prepare for the students and everything. So that was good. We did just a semester, and I'm thinking as a teacher, but also as a student here, a lot of this is relationships, and I know that sometimes you don't always see the big picture as a student, and the teacher doesn't always see the student's perspective. So if you're in a good situation, a year long would be ideal. But if you're in a situation where your philosophy could be different, or when you get ready to take over the classroom and you're doing things opposite, obviously it would not. So I think the more experience a teacher can get, a student teacher, that will prepare you, because it is so different. I can remember one of my student teachers was like, she goes, I just love to sit back and watch you watch your magic. And I'm thinking, this is not magic, I'm working hard. And so, yeah, you know, because I think, and I was very, like, my students were my students, and I wanted them to get the best of the best. So yes, I was protected, but you have to let student teachers really know what it's like to stand in front of a classroom and take them down for the day, the week, 2 weeks, and not necessarily influence at the time. So, you know, I think it's wonderful. I don't know the partnership piece, the cooperative piece from the teacher in the classroom and the student teacher. I really don't know what that looks like here at Purdue, but I think the more experience you get, the better you will be before you leave and graduate. I really do.
Great.
Could I add a couple of points to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a bit of a misnomer to say year-long student teaching, because that hasn't been how it's turned out to be. Logistically, it just can't happen. So what we're calling it really is expanded student teaching.
Okay.
So semester 7 students in elementary ed, they spend either 2 or 3 days a week in that semester 7, sort of ramping up, getting familiar with the classroom environment, building those relationships in semester 7, but they're also taking coursework on those off days. And then semester 8 is the same context. They're not going from one field experience to another, but so they can just kind of hit the ground running in semester 8 for their full-time student teaching experience. And it looks different for secondary as well, because secondary education, they're still packed with coursework and content courses. So what we're doing to make it expanded student teaching for them is the field experience that is attached to their capstone methods course that they take in semester 7. Before I2, that typically was 20 to 30 hours depending on the program. So we're trying to ramp that up, and again, tying it to the student teaching context. So they're still in that same environment, but they're a little bit more limited in the secondary programs as far as how many hours they can actually spend in the field. So.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. Were there some online?
Yes, question from the online chat. This is for the K-12 educators in the room. Do you have any advice for researchers who are interested in running studies, how to approach students, how to approach faculty, the community, even if the answer is no, how to kind of grapple with that? Let me see if I can treat that more. What would you like researchers to know before approaching teachers and students and administrators?
I don't know, for me, just in, reading research, because I've taken a little dip in, and maybe considering getting my PhD a couple different times, and I don't know if it was chickened out or scared out or whatever the case may be. Just in reading that, oftentimes, even in the research, I feel like the teacher and the student are somewhat neglected in the research component, in terms of really asking those questions that would really get at the root or the base of whatever research is trying to be collected. So whether it's struggling with reading, or whether it's struggling with mathematics or STEM learning, whatever the case may be, is actually gearing and directing the questions fully at the student and the teacher, because sometimes I feel like the decision makers and or administrators are the ones that have the biggest voice in some of the things that I have read, as opposed to the two people that are actually engaging and interacting with each other.
Thank you.
Any other online?
No.
Okay. Okay. So, Jason, I like that fact that you do education in the community. What kind of things can you tell us are important for our communities to kind of enrich families with, and how can we kind of support those kind of education programs as we're supporting our students in and out of the classroom?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to understand the question.
So education in the community
Yeah.
is very important. And what are the kind of education pieces that would support children and families in and out of the classroom? What kind of educational opportunities in the community should our communities really be focusing on?
Got it. So my experience has been that there's not always like a distinct difference between the kinds of, I guess, the content that maybe is being focused on in formal classrooms. It's just a different environment. So, you know, Shrita mentioned that she has a first Lego League team that she's a coach for what she has. She's a coach, and she let me come along with her for 10 years or so on that journey. And so I see that there are really important. I'm just using this as a for instance. There are really great skills that the kiddos are learning. You know, from algorithmic thinking, programming robots, teamwork, working together, doing research, public speaking. So many wonderful skills, but there are certain populations of our community that won't get involved in a First Lego League team at their school for various reasons. I still value those skills and those opportunities. And so some of my undergrads, because I mentioned that I really invested in developing undergraduate scholars who are engaged, so they're doing engagement work, have launched Lego League teams and after-school programs to kids who go to these schools, but they are not likely to get involved in those same programs within their school for lots of reasons that we don't have time to talk about right now, but for various reasons they're not going to get involved in those programs. They don't see themselves like fitting there. But in these after-school programs, they're very excited to see the robots and to program them. And so that's what I meant by sometimes the content isn't always different. It's a different space. It's a different environment. So very similar types of things in terms of what communities can offer to these after-school programs. I'm going to pick up on Shrita may not have been mentioning this at all. I'm probably just sniffing it out, but is that as someone who's done lots of research in public schools and making the ask of the teachers. Another question was for K-12. I'm just saying, being on the researcher side and asking, but also from the community perspective, is that we do often, I guess, make the ask from what we need or what we think our students need, and don't adequately partner with the teachers, with the students, or with our community partners. And so, where am I going with this? What I'm getting at is, in a community space or an after-school program, it's helpful if you get people like me who are making an ask that you, I guess it's important for the community to come out to, if we're focusing on the youth and their learning, it's important for communities to sort of rally behind that, and mostly rally behind that to not just sit back, but let's partner. I don't want it to be just about me, just about my students, or about these kids in this space. Let's actually partner together so that we can co-create the environment, we can co-create the initiatives, we can co-create the programs, and it's not just, oh, this professor from Purdue wants to do these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, meeting them where they're at, kind of joining them and partnering. Jenny, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, just on the community-based education, like don't overlook the role a municipality can play. The mayors, right? So we don't have to have the school district do everything, but what we try to do in Fort Collins through our Parks and Rec department is offer really robust enrichment opportunities for income qualified people. Young people, of all ages, actually. We look across the age span, right? So, getting out in parks, having opportunities that they may not have, just that, other kids with more privilege have, their parents are taking them here, and look to your municipality partner for this equity and what kids can, over the summer. And it's not just like the reading drill, it's like get in the state parks. Have you done kayaking? Can you do, participate, develop those enrichment opportunities so that it doesn't always have to be summer school from 8 to noon for the kids who didn't do well in X, Y, and Z. Oh, come on. You can do that too. But, I feel bad about, as a special educator, I think a lot of times those academic deficits come from a lack of enrichment opportunities, so that's just part of it as well.
That's good.
You know, I think when you have a, as a researcher or an academic person, which, again, you have, I guess, a bigger picture vision of what you may see as the deficit or what you think may need to be offered, but I think people that are having these lived experiences, if there was a thought or an idea or a feeling, to ask them what they actually would like to see happen in their life, what they would like to see improved. And, I think when you were talking about the reading component, I think, a human being being able to read and know and understand about their, ancestral people and the contributions that their people have made. There are some kids that are living in these impoverished situations that have no idea that people of their race, have done these amazing things.
Right.
Because sometimes their skills are limited, and if you struggle to read, you probably don't want to read.
Right.
And so you're not gonna know all of these things, and sometimes academically, this information isn't being presented to you. So you are gonna have to want to be able to seek out this information on your own. And so I think, to what so much has already been said, I think the more that an individual can kind of do for themselves, the more that I feel like their environment, their world will get better, will be better. And I think, being an educator is one of those ways that I think had I have had, I was a good student, but had I have had someone willing to invest in me, to pull me out of my shell, to help me see all of the opportunities that I could have chosen, would have been, I don't even know.
Right.
I just think about all of the possibilities that could have been there if I had someone to pull me out of that corner and get my nose out of the book and,
Right.
hey, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that? And, that's, I think, the most exciting thing about being an educator is seeing that child that that can do so much more if only you could, pull them out of their little world. And sometimes it's not necessarily the social economic piece, but sometimes it's just that quiet child.
Right. Yeah. Right. So you have an
There's a
online.
question
Oh,
right there.
go ahead.
Sure. So what I've learned is that, and what I love about being an educator is being an educator is a way of life. It's not just a job. So many of the other occupations out there are a job, you get a paycheck, but as an educator, it's more of a way of life. And I grew up, as many of you probably did, in an educator's family. So my mom was an educator, special education teacher. I'm a product of the Prince George's County Public School System. So, what I found though, growing up in that environment, is there's an ivory tower kind of sense between being an educator and the community. And you touched on this a little bit, Mayor. What are the ways that we can bridge the gap between, or break down the silos between life and school systems? I love what you said about reading. I mean, reading is fundamental not only to education, but to being able to live in society. Where can we find those interfaces that we can break down the silos between municipalities and education systems?
Elect more teachers.
Serve in their copious spare time.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
And Dr. Ware, you and I have talked about this in many ways. I think that's a research opportunity, but I think that's where we need to look at how we can figure out a way to interface those two worlds. Because it is a way of life, it's not just a job.
I think that could come in the teacher education piece, right? Making sure that the people who are choosing the teaching profession see it as a way of life, absolutely, in whatever role they play. But we've all said that we've had different roles, right? But I honestly, we need to expand our notion of what it is to create a community together. Through education, obviously, is a huge part with our school district. I partner hard with them, but also just in every way, right? I had a young woman in my office on Wednesday with severe cerebral palsy, and she's like, Jenny, you know, we have dial-a-ride, and so that's no charge to them because all our transit's free in Fort Collins. And so is our dial-a-ride for special needs people, also free, but it mirrors the transit, and we don't have transit service on Sunday. She goes, but I'm like, well, okay, that's gonna stop for dial-a-ride people, right? For people who need just a single ride.
Right.
So she said, I had a health emergency on a Sunday and I'm supposed to, they said, we call 911. And she said, but if it's not a health emergency, you have to pay for the ambulance. And she's like, I can do that. So I think those things are super important in building a community, and I would even venture to say a democracy. I really am on this too. I'm really on that. Every voice heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other? Okay, any online questions?
No.
Okay, we have just, we'll finish up, wrap up. I always love to ask, what was your best or, most memorable experience as a Purdue student, now a Purdue alumni? Like, what are the things that stick out to you that make it, special to come back to Purdue? We're at Purdue.
I'll go first since I'm the oldest. And this is very sincere. So I don't know how you all operate, but when I came here, I was my first generation, college person, did not have any resources. I did have some scholarship money. And I think I really had to work hard. I think the first 2 years were a shock to me. I was from rural Indiana, but I wanted to be a teacher, so I knew I had to persevere. Then I came, into my education classes and everything was fine. But I didn't take advantage of everything that Purdue had to offer back then. I wish I would have. Now when I walk the campus, I have this satisfaction that this, I am so proud to be back. You leave and you get in your life, and for 40-some years I worked, and we'd come back once in a while because I still have relatives, but Purdue has so much to offer. And there are so many good people here. It's the people, the facilities are wonderful, we have a beautiful campus, but I love coming back, and I love watching the students here. They are such quality individuals. I've eaten at some cafeteria, the Mary Ford, is it, or something, where the kids, I just love going in there, and my husband's with me, he's a Purdue grad engineer, and I look at the students, and they are so polite. They take care of their trash. They say, excuse me, if they get in front of me, I walk the campus and they're talking, especially if they're by themselves, they'll be on their phone a little bit, but basically they're communicating. And I go back and I am like the biggest cheerleader for Purdue, because I am just like over the moon that this university continues to be such an excellent place to live and work and have students prepared for the rest of their life. One thing I always told even in my first grade class, second grade, you're here because this is your job, and we're going to help you become a productive citizen. That should be our goal. And that gives me such pleasure and satisfaction. So, Purdue's the best.
Winter halls, Shealy Hall, all the fun that we had in there. And me and my roommate, we weren't people that went out and partied or anything. So we would, when it was curfew, when you'd have to come through the lake gate, we would, this is ridiculous, but anyway, we would go out of the building and trying to come back through the late gate just to say that we did it. And the monitor, like, I just saw you walk inside until, you know, I think one time in our 4 years did we actually come in late for something. But it was funny because we tried a couple different times, like maybe they didn't see us, you know, so you crawl. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. And my one other fond memory, even though you could break your neck, was the ice polishers. When you're on your way, walking to class and they clear the snow.
Yeah.
They clear the snow.
Yes.
So there'd be this nice layer of ice. And you'd be walking and you would see like 2 or 3 people wipe out in front of you. And so you would slowly make your way to the other side of the street in hopes that you could make it to class without falling. Yeah, so those are a lot of memories.
Well, I guess I did a master of teaching, so I have a PhD here, and my husband did a PhD here. So we are very grateful to the opportunities that Purdue University provided for us. We are also, during those times, able to have 3 children, which is not probably common now because it's very, you know, so that was a great way to be a young person with 3 kids and doing all the things that we still were able to do. So I don't really have any memories of interacting with the university other than getting a babysitter. And one day my bike had a flat and I had to get up to teach my class 217, I think it was. And I didn't have any, I was just like, I had to be there in like 5 minutes. So I just got on my first grader's bike. And it was this tiny little bike. And I was like, all right, I was dressed like this. I was like, and I didn't care with my helmet on. I was like, I know someone's gonna see me. I get off this little tiny bike and sure enough, my husband's boss is walking by and he looks at me and I go, "What?" And I lock it to the bike. I walk in and then I rode home. So basically being a mom and a student and a scholar and a teacher was very fulfilling, but I will say for me, I mentioned her several times that Cox changed my life.
Mm.
We got all of that on the recording.
My dad was a PhD student when I was born, so I say at Purdue, I mean, all of my parents split very early in my life. I say I was born a Boilermaker. All 4 of my degrees are from here. I grew up here, so memories all throughout my life of literally playing on campus. You know, we would ride elevators that are in the Wood Street parking garage over glass. The thing to do when you were 12 is to put your nose into the glass, and so as it comes down, it hits it looks like you're gonna hit the ceiling. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you have to
do that with my 3 kids
see,
too.
yeah. So, and I'm old enough to remember when, I guess it was only this way for a couple of years, Grand Prix used to have a carnival. So as a little kid, I thought that's what the Grand Prix was. Like you go, because we lived off Viega Road, so my older sibling would walk me to campus and we would go on the rides. And so I thought that's what Grand Prix was. I had no idea what that was. So my point is I've been on campus literally all of my life. And so it's just a very special place. I will say I completely undervalued it. I very much took it for granted until I actually came back to work here in 2007. And then I'd go to conferences and I would see how other universities viewed Purdue and came to us for all the advice. And not that we're the only university in the world, but that was sort of the experience at different conferences. And then certainly now on the faculty side of things, I still hold true that, you know, we do amazing research here. I have been nurtured, and maybe it's not appropriate for me to say things, but I had wonderful like graduate committee and my whole graduate experience was absolutely amazing. So I'm definitely a big Purdue fan. I was kind of born here, but I still love it. I've grown to appreciate it more over time.
Excellent. That's it for this hour. Thank you so much for all of your answers. Really, really appreciate you doing this for us today. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. I think you have another hour, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's step out.
Switch.
I'll ask the diversity panel to come up, and we'll get started here shortly.
Thank you so much. It was really great.
Oh, wonderful. Good.
No, I think we're already had a nice list of questions, so we just get started. Where is the camera?
The camera is there, that it's a 360-degree camera, so it captures every right. And at the moment, you are highlighted.
Okay, so if I choose to stand and talk, it will always be there.
So, yes, it's in the right position for you to do that.
All right, I'm gonna stand. I just jumped out. Yeah, fine. Sorry for saying a lot of questions, but I wanted this to be as thorough as possible.
I have to leave, my team meeting is 11:30, so I pushed until 11:45, but I didn't usually leave at 11:45.
So if, we're going to go ahead and get started and transition to the second portion of our Power Friday, which we're going to be looking at the recent decision by the Supreme Court on where they upended affirmative action or race-based admissions criteria for schools and colleges across the country. And so as we get started, I want us to think about a comment that former Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell made with his decision on Bake, which was in 1978, again was seen as a fundamental or actually a solid decision from the court that upheld affirmative action when it came to race-conscious or race-based decisions in higher education. And he said, for almost a half a century, race-conscious admissions have been of central importance to Harvard and other select colleges and universities. In his controlling opinion in the landmark case of Regents of the University of California versus Bake in 1978, Justice Powell said, the Harvard plan at that time was a model for the kind of affirmative action and explained why the Supreme Court considered it constitutional. He said, the path to leadership must be visibly open to talented and qualified individuals of every race and ethnicity, because the nation's future depends upon leaders trained through the wide exposure to the ideas and mores of students as diverse as this nation of many peoples. But unfortunately, in one broad stroke, in June of 2023, the Supreme Court's Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard basically upended race-based or race-conscious decisions when it came to college admissions process. I want us to look at the implications for teacher education with this recent decision. No teacher education program across the country would say that diversifying the workforce or the profession is not of importance. We realize the importance of that. We realize the importance of having diverse teacher candidates in our programs play in helping to bridge equity and opportunities that students will maybe lack or not have in their K-12 settings. And so what I want us to do today, we will sound a clarion call to all teacher preparation programs, Purdue and beyond, to strategically tackle both explicit and the implicit implications of this decision on diversifying the profession. So I've got a few questions for the panel. I'm going to throw out the questions and I will just kind of go down the line with your responses to the questions. And I want you to kind of think about this notion of a recent decision and how it plays a role in what we do as teacher educators and in schools and colleges of education. So the first question, oh, actually, we need to introduce our panel. Sorry, that was the first thing. The time has thrown me off. I want to get this started, but so let me go ahead and introduce the panel. I am Dr. Crystal Johnson. I am Associate Professor in Social Studies Education here at Purdue, and look at all aspects of civic and youth development within my field. To the right of me, I have Dr. Stephanie Maska. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please. Or
Yes,
tell us who you are.
Stephanie,
Yeah.
Associate Professor, Curriculum Studies. My work looks at race and belonging around Indigenous contexts and institutional practices.
Thank you.
Oh, maybe we'll be a professor, I think we all know me, in education. My current work looks at human-animal relationships within the context of diversity and equity in society, and my older work is in multicultural education and international education. And I do a lot of community engagement, that's my focus.
And my name is Cornelius Bynum. I'm the Associate Professor in the History Department and Director of African American Studies here at Purdue. And my work focuses on sort of Black radical traditions and social justice pursuits.
So thank you, panel, for joining us today. So being mindful of the time, I do want to get started because I want to go into this discussion as robust as possible. So I'm going to open up with this question. Given that this foundational program has been upended by the Supreme Court, that being the foundation program being affirmative action when it comes to college admissions, how do we consider race in talent development? How do we consider race in talent development?
Oh, I do have notes. To take some notes. I mean, so like, so like looking at all of these questions, I think like fundamentally what I struggle with in terms of thinking through an answer is that the institution should have responded differently. Like Purdue should have responded differently. And when I brought this up in other more public spaces, I get what people say back is like, well, our peers. Well, that's actually not true. Like if you look at other Big Ten institutions, their response has been in the other direction, which is like, we are going to invest as much money as we can around figuring this out, as opposed to what is happening here, which is the slow decline, right? Provost Wolf is taking chief diversity officer out of his title, and that's just going to be the way that's going to move. But I would say that so how do we get to that point? I mean, some of the things I thought is that we really need to think. I mean, they're having similar conversations about this over in engineering, which is how are we going to? We're going to have to just do a lot more direct recruitment and like go to places and be present. And, so it's going to change, like, how are we, what communities are we going into, and how are we talking to potential, pre-service teachers, and what kind of efforts are we making that? So it's gonna shift, because we don't have that data anymore, and kind of base decisions on that. So we're gonna have to kind of gather that data with our eyes and move in those directions.
So everything Stephanie said. I was on the way over here. I was thinking about the Purdue response, in quotes, and how that's problematic. But Stephanie is, as a senator, is much better positioned to talk about the institution. I have a bunch of different things to say under maybe all the different questions, and some things that didn't really fit into the questions. And I think we all know that, historically, when affirmative action is rolled back, like in California, we have historical examples. What happens, it's not just what happens sort of at the process of university admissions and recruitment, it is what happens to what people imagine the possibilities for their lives are. And we know that a lot of BIPOC students just, unselected from applying to competitive universities in California and probably elsewhere. I mean, I'm not a scholar in the area of affirmative action, but I do follow the general sort of news. And that to me at the mega level is very troubling. When Crystal talks about what happens to talent development at the level of a broad swath of society, the SCOTUS decision is extremely obviously wrong, troubling, problematic, and hopefully eventually will be reversed. But I think when we think about teacher education, it's a little bit of a different story because I've been in teacher education for what, like more than 30 years at this point? This is the same conversation, you know, all of you know that, right? So to me, within teacher education, focusing on the legal implications of the SCOTUS decision are perhaps evading the questions about teacher education. That we as a, you know, as a profession need to grapple with in the context of SCOTUS, but also outside that context.
I guess I would frame this question slightly differently before trying to actually address the question about recruitment and development, talent recruitment and development. This most recent decision by the Supreme Court to subvert affirmative action historically is the most recent iteration, I guess, of the comprehensive effort to upend the intentions of the civil rights movement. So since the signing of, well, really since Brown, the determination to preserve racial bias in education has been a fundamental commitment of some, largely in the South, but increasingly as conservative politicians have found new ways to frame language around things like anti-wokeness, it's become more mainstream, and I think this is sort of where, Stephanie, your comments about Purdue's response fits in. It becomes a kind of a palatable suburban approach to free speech. But you see it also play out in efforts to roll back civil rights protections that were established with the Civil Rights Bill in '64. Most recently, those have kind of focused on religious choice in whom to serve and how. Certainly, we've seen determined efforts to use gerrymandering to disenfranchise people of color all across, certainly the South, but in other places as well. So the consequence of all this is now, I think, showing up particularly in the context of higher education, and I don't think it's any real mystery as to why we reached this point now. Some of it is just sort of pragmatic because of the shifting politics that subverted the court, right? But the massive resource disparities that pervade our society, there are investments in preserving those disparities. And the most fundamental way to ensure those massive resource disparities persist is to constrict education. I mean, in the previous panel, the comment I think the woman on the end made about what does social justice look like to you as a teacher, the ability to read, profound to me. But the consequence of this decision for teacher education with that answer in mind is the most direct way that a child learns to read is to see people like them reading. And if you are able to restrict or remove people of color from those places and spaces where they can be role models for reading or education or excellence, then you, as you point out, narrow the horizons of possibility. And for me as a historian, there's simply no way to evaluate the court's decision here outside the context of the generational determination to roll back racial advancement.
And when I think about the question, considering race and talent development, I look at it from sustaining a multiracial, multicultural democracy. We cannot do that if we do not invest in the talent across the board for all citizens in the country. I think what the recent decision reaffirms is that there are forces, and we've known this, President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt spoke about this in the 1930s. There are forces in this country that do not believe in democracy as we know it or want to believe, and that they would, I'm going to mess up his quote, but they would rather feather their own nest than to actually expand opportunities to others in this country who are not like them. And if we are trying to survive, if we are trying to take this experiment to another 100 years, to the next millennia, we have to understand that we are a multiracial, multicultural democracy that must invest in every talent or talented person in this country, or every person, regardless of race or ethnicity. And that is something that I think the court's decision proved to me, that there, again, are these anti-democratic forces that want to maintain power at any cost. And that, it is a direct, I think you're right, Neil, it's a direct response to the 50 and 60 years of the civil rights movement and the progress of that movement. Some might even argue it's the second, the second reaction to the second Reconstruction period that we saw in this country. So again, it's this obvious notion that from a civic standpoint, that we have to stay on guard, and that we cannot maintain our society if we do not invest in all children in all circumstances. Okay. All right, so I'm going to jump to this other question because I think it kind of fits into what you guys were kind of alluding to. So I was intrigued by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent to this case, and where he argued that deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. And in speaking about her colleagues in the court, having so detached itself from this country's actual past and present experiences, the court has now been lured into interfering with the crucial work that UNC and other institutions of higher learning are doing to solve America's real world problems. No one benefits from ignorance. So it brings to bear this idea that there are these dueling perspectives or interpretations on discrimination and race. And so I turn to the panel and I want you to think about Justice Brown Jackson's quote. How does this impact, or how might these decisions impact teacher recruitment, and then of course impact student achievement? You were alluding to that in some of your responses. I want to go a little bit deeper, if you don't mind.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, so if folks have not read the dissent, I would highly recommend it. It's gorgeous. I'm not sure how she doesn't like hit those people all the time. Like it's amazing. I mean, whatever, it's amazing because she's like so much smarter than all of them. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to answer the question, but I think it's, I think about this a lot, right? Because one of the problems with all these lawsuits is always this presumption that you have a spot in a college admission process, right? It's like, I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan, and I was there from 1997 to 2001. And so all 4 years, they were fighting 2 Supreme Court cases, one regarding undergraduate admission with, and then one with the law school. And so they lost the undergrad one and won the law school, and but basically made a compelling case that race should be a compelling factor in admissions. And so I spent all 4 years basically in this very interesting campus conversation, who deserves to be there. And then Michigan, as part of the court process, had to release their formula they did for admissions. And I'm pretty sure that I was there mostly from an underrepresented state, because I lived in Tennessee. Being Native American only got me 2 points, and being from Tennessee got me 7 points. So, but I think that the problem is that, at least what is that the folks who are the loudest about this are controlling the narrative really around it. And so, and I think that, I thought the panel had some really interesting things to say, but I also thought that there was this very Pollyannish view of you know, like, we just need to like love, or we just need to do this kind of stuff. And like, and the reality is that, like, and this kind of goes along with is that if we are unable to make these cases and we aren't able to recruit in these ways, then what happens is that like we're going to have a group of teachers who are basically like, do not think that these things exist. And I know, like, I have worked with like brown and black people here who have said like, you know, this student felt like this comment was really racist. And then the faculty member tells me the comment, I'm like, yeah, that was really racist. And they were like, are you sure? Like, maybe they just misinterpreted it. I'm like, what? And so I think that is just, and it goes back to the point I was trying to make in the first question, right? Like, if you don't understand the systems that are at work here, and you think these are all individual types of things, then it's going to be very easy for teachers in particular to ignore what is happening in their classrooms because they just don't think it exists.
So let me take in the direction of sort of connecting directly to teacher education, because I was just at a conference. I just came back Wednesday night from a conference, and part of the conference was teacher education. So I had a lot of conversations with people and also listened to panels, and I was on some panels. And there are a couple things that really struck me. Number one was there were some faculty from Louisiana, and Louisiana apparently has a required year-long residency, right, for teaching. And they were talking about how this basically works against their recruiting for some of the reasons that one of the people on the panel said that a lot of you know, people, low-income students cannot give up an entire year, right? And so we have to think about what we do in terms of our teacher education programs, in terms of the impact on students, and we always have to take into account the financial implications. I will say very clear that one of the reasons I did not do teaching at an undergraduate level was because I could not, there wasn't, when I was in Massachusetts, there was like a student teaching for, it was a semester. I could not fathom how I was going to support myself for that semester. No way, had no idea how I was going to support myself that semester. If I was not, like, it just, I couldn't figure it out. It couldn't work, couldn't do anything else. So for me, as someone who grew up low income, though very complicated, not as clear as just low income, but a lot of cultural capital, just not a lot of money. That still is the reason I never went into teaching. So that's number one. The other reason they said is because they said that students want the campus experience. They do not want to give up. So there are two factors, financial and students want a campus experience. They do not want to give up a year. And I think that is endemic in teacher education. We don't think about our students as college students. We think about them within this very narrow pre-professional sort of mindset. And given my experience in residence life and all my experience in student affairs, I always think about students as students first, and teacher candidates and whatever other language is out there second. They're college students first and foremost, and I think we forget that. And the other piece that was really remarkable for me is there was someone from the Missouri NEA there, and she was talking about the fact that only 46% of people doing teacher licensure in the state of Missouri now actually went through a teacher education program. Most of them went through an alternative certification program. So right now we have a situation where in Missouri at least, where the minority of teachers going into the classroom have actually been certified through a traditional licensure program. And all that points to me that we cannot, we're a college of education. We're not a college of teacher education. And we need to think about education more broadly. Because I think if we do that and we start to think about students as students and not just, when everything we do in teacher education locks us into this very narrow box because of licensure, right? And I'm not saying we don't do that, but I'm saying if we really want diversity here, we have to think a little bit beyond teacher education, teacher candidates, and this very narrow pre-professional education. Then I think we will be on a path to greater diversity, because we're not going to be able to solve the problem of diversity in teacher education. I mean, this is the same. I don't know what the numbers are, but they're probably not much better than when I got my PhD in 1998. They're probably not much better. Okay, so that says to me, stop pushing this rock up the hill and think about finding a different hill.
So Again, I think I'm taking a different approach.
Good, that's what.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's why you're here. That's why you're here.
Okay, well,
Go right ahead.
This question impacted me more for the notion of dueling views of discrimination and race, maybe less so for the impact on recruitment and student achievement. In 1994 or so, there was an article published in maybe the Journal of American History by a guy named Kevin Brown, and he talked about, the title of the article was something like "The Path Not Taken in Brown." And what he says in his article essentially is that by framing segregation in education and in a deficit model for Black students alone, it creates a dynamic where redressing that deficit definitionally means others have to yield or give up something. And a more accurate way of thinking about the harm of segregation is termed is the dual harm of segregation. What does discrimination, what do these absences in teacher education that you're talking about, what does that mean, not just for Black and brown children, but for all children? And how I interpret Kevin Brown's point in this notion of the dual harm of segregation is that by ignoring the consequential impacts of segregation on white children, it creates a dynamic where it helps to underline opposition to change. More broadly speaking, if we are more conscious, maybe even just open to the idea that discrimination robs white children of the ability to cultivate racial empathy, meaning having the ability to see the world through a lens not formed only through their own experience, then we have a better chance of preserving democracy, right? For years, growing up as a kid, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, border state, but nonetheless still Southern. For years, it was always understood in my community that police brutality was a thing. But it wasn't until the 1990s when Newsweek or Time had a story on its front page that it seemed to white America that this was a real thing. And what I need to say is that this lack of racial empathy has created a worldview where the dominant, the privileged in American society only credits as real things that they see or experience themselves, and can easily discredit anything that's not directly seen or experienced, right? It's how you get a Rodney King circumstance, right? It's how we get to the point where it's only in the catastrophic events that lead to George Floyd's murder that these questions about police brutality even resonate. So with the situation you're talking about, was it racist or not? Well, if you have to ask the question, you're the problem.
Right, yes.
Right. But again, this is the dual harm of segregation, is the denial for multiple generations of people to develop the kind of emotional empathy to not only compassionately sympathize, but simply believe that there can be a world, there can be an experience, a valid experience that they themselves have not had. Ultimately, the hubris of white supremacy is believing that only what happens to white people matter. And this is what segregation has crafted. And even the civil rights movement response to it has reified it. This is how we get to a court decision. And this is what Supreme Court Justice Brown Jackson is talking about, the hubris of white supremacy. So what does that mean for talent recruitment and student development? Well, it means that if what shows up in our school systems are teachers, black, white, or other, who can't conceive of or imagine a world in which racism actually exists, then the clock on justice has already been rolled back.
Now, I think that's a great point. You all made some great responses to the question, and just to kind of come back to it, when we have these, and thank you for citing Kevin's team.
Oh, you know,
yeah, I had to read it in undergrad, and so it makes, I think it explains clearly where we are now
and how we hear it.
Exactly, and how we see things, post Brown, even up into this period where we are dealing with the now post Harvard decision. That when Brown was handed down in 1954, and most of us as education folks would know that many states in the South still did not desegregate immediately. My home city, Virginia, did not desegregate. The last district did not desegregate until 1972. So you're talking about almost 18 years after the decision. But it created this sense that, like you said, this deficit sense that if we give up something, I mean, if they're going to get something, we're giving up something. And it's always been proposed in that sense. And it built this reactionary response that we saw in society from that point, that if I extend affirmative action into business, then some white gentleman or some white lady or someone else is losing that position. And that's not the case. I think if we would have looked at it from this notion of what was the dominant society losing based off of being in a segregated society, would have changed hopefully the thinking that white populations fell after the Brown decision, and then of course after the Civil Rights Act and after the Voting Rights Act and so forth. But I think when we look at these dueling perspectives on discrimination and race and how it plays out in teacher recruitment, teacher development, and impacting classrooms, you're right. If we have teachers who do not identify or understand that race is important, that issues of racism are present, and that we have to be empathetic to students who experience this or come from communities that traditionally experience this, then they will never be able to meet those students where they are. So therefore, if you are, I'm gonna use my Virginia slang, if you're hollering about a achievement gap, and you're so concerned about closing achievement gaps, but you can't accept that not every student that comes to you is coming to you, not just quote unquote from a disadvantaged home economic resource wise, but because they're having to experience things that your communities don't. They may have to see their father being pulled over for no reason other than driving while black, and so therefore it will discolor their perception of the police, police in their communities. That's going to have an impact on how they see servants, public servants in their schools. If their experience is that when the parent went to school, they had a very negative experience with the teachers, whether it was because of segregated society or whatever else, that's going to discolor how they view their relationship with schools as well. And we have to understand that when we approach teacher education and teacher recruitment. You're right, Nadine. We have been talking about diversifying the profession forever. The former dean of the School of Education at Howard University just recently gave a talk at for AERA's Brown series, Dr. Fenwick, and where she noted the number of black teachers that were lost due to desegregation. Yeah. And and she also, what she didn't really go too much into, and full disclaimer, I'm a alumni of Howard. I was in their School of Education many years ago. But she didn't go into the other side of that the teachers that were let go from these schools when schools were closed during desegregation, the black teachers in particular, were more qualified than their white counterparts. Yeah. Many of these teachers held PhDs because they could not get jobs in other institutions. And when the school systems had to make a choice, they chose the white teachers who were underqualified and kept them versus the black teachers who were qualified. And so that already set up this dynamic that you so spoke about, that there was no sense of seeing the other side and seeing that other perspective. It was, well, they were obviously black, that school doesn't count, that degree doesn't count, so therefore we're not going to maintain them. And that created the deficit that we see today with the lack of diverse teachers in the profession. And we've never been able to go back and deal with that in a substantial way and use that as a form of recruitment to bring students into the classroom.
Can I add?
Go ahead.
There's a really good book by a guy named Jack Doherty, I believe, called More Than One Struggle. And he looks at the post-Brown reaction of African Americans in Milwaukee, I believe. And the underlying point is that not everyone saw, not all African Americans saw the victory in Brown solely in terms of integration. That it did not mean, for some, for many, that black schools would disappear. It would simply mean that black schools got their fair share of resources, right? The other thing that I want to point out in just sort of relation to your comment, Crystal, is the great irony of the Brown decision, which is that Brown dismantled the educational system that produced Thurgood Marshall, who argued the Brown case, right? History is an ironic force, and that's a clear example of the law of unintended consequences.
You know, I have been coordinating the multicultural education class here for a long time. We teach Brown, and the class has gotten, shrunken down over the years, but we still teach Brown. And I hold to that every teacher candidate here needs to know about, they know nothing else, they must know about Brown. But when I was teaching it I haven't taught a section in a long time, but I'm teaching one right now. And when I was doing it this year, the students really, first of all, of course, they know absolutely nothing. Okay, we all know that. But they also only think about segregation as a Southern problem, right? But I grew up in Boston, right? And I was like, oh no, wait a minute. So I just, I know the resources well enough. They're talking, I'm Googling, I'm like, I'm gonna show you what happened in Boston. And then I also asked them to calculate this. Everything in Boston was in the 70s, I'm like, how many years after Brown was this? Look what's going on, This is all totally, they don't know anything about this. The lack of historical knowledge among our undergraduates is really highly problematic.
Young people generally.
Yeah, young people, I'm particularly, teacher education, young people absolutely generally. But we have lost in this college, we have lost our history of education courses, we've lost our cultural foundations of education courses, and these are the consequences of not educating our students. So it's not a mystery to me that when I talk, we teach really basic concepts, okay? Stereotypes, okay? The ladder of inference, how you think, how you make decisions, equity. These are mind-blowing things for our students. They've never thought about any of these things, the majority white female students in our classes. These are very simple things that I really feel like they should have learned in 6th grade.
Well, and I think that's an excellent point. And so, when the panelist earlier was talking about, Nancy saying, that every child can read. So I understand that, but at the same time, I'm like, there's so much more than that, right? And that's the problem, is that when these schools, our schools, choose to move into this model where it's just about number of hours in the classroom, and it's about I'm not a fan of I2. Because I think it moves away from more conceptual ideas about what education should be. Where are they supposed to get this information?
Right.
And then that's why you see these communities kind of flabbergasted at these highly coordinated right-wing political groups that have basically taken over, because they're like, what is happening? I'm like, I could have predicted this 15 years ago.
And our students don't read. We use young adult novels in the class, mostly around, sort of diversity, multicultural topics. Dear Martin, New Kid, Blackbird Fly, there's a whole bunch of them. Some around LGBTQ plus issues, those kind of books. Now these students, they're all like, telling, I do this anonymous feedback thing in the class. They're telling me, I never read books, and this is such a great book, and I would never have read it. They don't read, they don't, they don't.
The great irony is they better do it now, because when they get the school systems, those books won't be.
None of the things that we see should be surprising, exactly. I mean, we're reading things that they can't.
Yeah, they'll never see
They'll
in a
never
public
see in a
school.
public school. But none of these things should be surprising in terms of the decisions that this college has made to reduce the amount of emphasis on issues of social justice and diversity in the curriculum in a robust way, as opposed to a surface way.
Which, if I could say,
Go ahead,
Lance, if I could say, that's so disheartening to hear. Because what is education if not social justice? I mean, without education, there is no social justice. Like, I'm speechless.
And I also just think that the licensure and all the accreditation really constricts us. And that's why I do think that look, education happens in lots of spaces, not just in normal classrooms, right? And so there are students out there that if we had programs for community education, for working at your local, working at your local Y, for working at a nature center, for working in all these places, youth programs, working in after-school programs. I just think that we would tap into students who do not want to do licensure in the current way that it is structured. And we also would be making inroads in low-income communities around the state.
You know what that sounds like to me?
What?
Freedom schools.
Yes, yes.
That's exactly what they did in Mississippi in
Right.
64, 65.
Right, of course. And I know that, Brianna runs a freedom school, which is a little bit different model. But,
Are we not listening to something online?
Oh, no, this is broadcast.
It's just the camera.
And it's recording. No, the camera's on, it's active, everything's being recorded and captured. And there are 6 online participants. I apologize.
But can online people see us?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I just.
Thank you for checking. Thank you for
I've seen
checking.
that before, there's nothing on the screen.
Oh, yes, thank you for checking.
No, he just turned it off, so it's better viewed of
Okay.
the.
There are issues that were
Gotcha.
solved by doing that.
Gotcha,
Oh,
thank you.
okay.
Thank you for understanding.
You're good.
So I want to wrap up the question from the panelists before we turn to the audience. So, some of you have alluded to this already, but I want to go a little bit deeper. So how should Purdue's College of Education respond to the Supreme Court's recent decision? What do we need to do in our practice as far as recruitment, diversifying our curriculum, going out into the community? What should be our response?
I wrote down revolution. Question mark. I think that this is a very cautious, risk-averse place, and so it's really difficult. Like, I don't, if I had been interim dean, I would have issued a very strongly worded statement. Like, I would have been like, I think that the way that the campus has responded to this is, I just think, very telling of why Black faculty and, keep leaving, because it's like, if your response to something that is going to dismantle something your institution is not even really that great at, and your response is like, we're going to follow the law, it's like, okay, I get it. I don't belong here. I don't belong here, yeah. And now my work is just gonna be that much harder to do because, you don't believe in this. And so I think that, we should respond by being very vocal about the harm that this will continue to bring us. I know that President Chang and Patrick Wolf are not going to change, but that's not actually why we need to say those things, right? It's to signal to the other people, yeah, we recognize that this is the law, but in our statements, we hope that you understand that we are committed to something different. And, I'm still an active alum at the University of Michigan, and they rolled out kind of at the same time that Purdue was like, we're following the law, they rolled out DEI 2.0, where they're investing millions and millions of dollars into how can they make this, if they can't consider race now, what are they going to do to do that? And it's like, you know, both reactions are that's telling.
So,
Oh, no, go ahead.
yeah, no, I think I actually going to highlight something you were saying earlier, which is to say that there are so many robust community programs that could be active partners for the school of education, to find people who are already committed to community building and social justice and just haven't either found a path into education or envision education as a place that validates and supports their social justice and activism mission. You know? And I mean, I can think of several programs in places like Indianapolis or Louisville, Kentucky, or wherever, my hometown, some of which I went through as a child, as a teenager, that could be just sort of natural pathways in the schools of education if there was a determination to build such a pathway. And so I take your point about revolution, you know.
Two votes.
Well, but let's be clear. I mean, social change never comes from comfort, right? People who are comfortable are never inspired or motivated or incentivized to change. That's true of institutions and society as well, right? The lesson of the civil rights movement is that complacency leads to failure, right? So absolutely, make those points, press the issue, don't capitulate. That's how we ended up with Brett Kavanaugh, because Mitch, I got my own state.
McConnell.
Yes,
Yeah.
McConnell, refused to capitulate to decorum
Yeah.
and custom and got his way.
Yes.
But that can't be the only response. And there are young people who are deeply committed to social activism and social justice, who, for whatever reason, one reason or another, have not or do not see education in the way it's practiced in their community and across the country as a ally in their goals.
Why would they? I mean, look.
Well, no, that's my point.
Yeah, exactly, why would they? 3 for revolution.
Okay.
You're taking the founding there. You know, I'm thinking about some of the people I know in this community who went through our teacher education program and left teaching, like the woman who owns Flourish Art Studio on Main Street. And this is not necessarily a diversity and equity issue, but it's the point is still, she felt too constricted in the classroom teaching art. She's like, I can't teach art in this classroom because all I am focused on is standards and checking boxes. And so she opened this art studio, which is flourishing, no pun intended.
Nice.
And is creating these amazing opportunities. And we partner with her all the time on different things. You know, so she's taken the skills she learned here and she's contributed so much in our community. And she was so frustrated by the teaching profession. There are other people, like someone who worked at the West Lafayette Wellness Center, who runs education programs there. She went through our program, and also teaching was like you know, if you were like a thinking person, it is very hard to be in a teacher education program and be in a classroom right now, because every force is working against you actually thinking. And challenging your students to think. You're actually not allowed to do that anymore. So, you know, there's multiple ways that we have to work to counter what Purdue does, right? I mean, for example, as I emailed Stephanie a little while ago, you know, what's going on in Israel and Gaza. I mean, you know, President Chang shows up at Hillel, supports Jewish students. Have we heard one word of support for Palestinian students, for Arab students, for others? Nothing, okay? So, you know, Purdue, at an institutional level, there is obviously the need for that R word. And then there's the issue of teacher education as an institution, and that goes beyond Purdue. I mean, this is not a Purdue issue, what's going on here at Purdue. And then there is the issue of how do we build differently as a college of education, not a college of teacher education. And I think that's the space where there are opportunities because we can control things. We can't control a lot of Purdue institutionally. Teacher education is a long fight, right? Been going on forever, going to continue. But we have to focus on what can we control more easily. And I can tell you, it's not, you know, it's not CAPE, it's not accreditation, it's not teacher education more broadly, it's us.
And to respond, so those things, am I the only one that went through a teacher preparation program? Yeah, okay, sorry. You know, those things we cannot push back on. We can push back on them, but they are embedded in society for good reasons. And I'm going to say that for good reasons, for reasons that are, some of them are outside of our control, based off of a different way of thinking about how to professionalize teacher education and teacher development in ways that quote unquote have impact in classrooms. But I want to get back to this idea of what should our response be as a college of education, recognizing that there are folks right now, recruiters in our college who are going out and doing recruiting actively right now. There are folks, we are getting applications into the university is receiving applications. There are people who are reading, the students who want to come into education, reading their applications right now and making decisions. And I think, and I go back to your point, Stephanie, you made, we have to be intentional about the communities we're going into to do the recruitment. We cannot sit and wait for the communities to invite us. We need to be present. And if that means going through the community aspect and going looking at community organizations, broadening the sense of what does it mean to be a teacher in both formal and informal context, then that is a conversation we probably should have. We cannot, we're in an institution and a setting that will not deviate from the law to an extent, or put forth a statement that even Harvard's president put forth, you know, that we will respect the law, but we believe these are our values and we believe in them, and we're going to go forward with promoting diversity and inclusion and equity. And I'm paraphrasing what she said, so please don't hold me to the T with that one. But I think we have to be more conscious about what is our role in developing teachers. Not only just for the state of Indiana, but more broadly as well for the nation and then globally too. I think we have to recognize that we are not doing enough in this college to go out into these communities and recruit. And you'll hear folks say, well, you know, we're not getting a lot of applications from these communities of color that want to be teachers. Well, most of, when you look at the data, the research on this, many of these communities, particularly in Indiana, communities of color, don't even realize Purdue has a college of education or a teacher prep program. So we can't even meet that need or that challenge if we have no known presence or let folks know that, hey, you can come here and be a teacher. And so I think that we have to get that into consideration. I think we have to stand firm on our values. If we believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need to say that. We need to say it very clear, and it should be part of how we approach the recruiting process. I don't want to keep going. Go ahead.
I have a quick question. Again, I'm not in college education, I'm in college arts. But I'm curious to know, you spoke about values, and how do you see the college's values aligning with the values and goals of these communities that you want to recruit in? Like, I mean, it's, in some ways, this goes back to this point about authenticity that came up before.
Yeah.
Like, you can go into Black churches and say, hey, we want you here. But if you have no value alignment or strategic alignment with these communities, you're not gonna get them.
And that's a
Right,
great
there are
point.
courses that reflect
Exactly.
it.
No,
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
you're absolutely right. That's
So, yeah, talk about your values, but how does the college live those values
Yeah.
in ways that are authentic to the communities that you want to see recruited here? And I mean, that's not a question I can answer, but I have a suspicion.
Well, you put it out there, and I think you're absolutely right, that if there's no authenticity with our values and the audience, the communities don't see that, then they're not going to want, they don't believe that we can do what they want to see us do.
Well, the companion to authenticity is alignment,
Yeah.
right? And if you are, in fact, in alignment with the strategic values, strategic goals, the fundamental values of these communities, you don't really have to recruit. You just have to say, we're open.
We're open.
You
But
know?
also the problem is that folks don't realize that we are open. And
Right.
so we have to,
But the gentleman in the bow tie actually, I think, illustrates the point.
yeah.
Talking about the way in which education is happening in communities. It's not like communities aren't doing education
Yes.
work.
Yes,
The point is, they don't believe that the work that they're doing in education
is valued.
or is in alignment with what's
Yeah.
happening in the
Yeah.
world.
Well, because they're right. I mean, they're absolutely right. That alignment is not there. And while I think that everyone on this panel would probably want to move the college
Yeah.
in that direction, I mean, you're looking at 3 faculty members and probably some people
For sure.
here and some people online. But whenever we are talking about teacher education, it always just turns into, and it has to, it turns into a box checking affair. And an alignment with standards and accreditation, because that is the larger context in which teacher education sits.
At this moment.
At this moment, that's the larger context in which teacher education sits. So regardless of what you want to do, you find yourself boxed in.
So I'm going to thank you to the panel for your robust responses to my questions, if they hopefully made sense. I'm going to open it up to the floor or any questions from online. We have some time left. If there are any questions.
The revolution meeting needs.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm starting to be in a problem-solving space more because this is very, it's exciting to talk about these ideas and like think about possible avenues for change. And I know we have community placements currently, but do we understand the range of those and who we're working with, and maybe even opportunities for extending the quality of the placements that our students are now, since it's a new initiative, how that's been going, like for improvements in that space, and maybe even extensions beyond the year one kind of finite experience there, or extreme time. Yeah.
I'm not the direct coordinator for that program. Is there anyone who wants to speak to that, Joanne?
Yeah, I could. I just did it for one semester, but I know Stephanie would agree. There's so many problems around it. It's a 1-credit course. They spend less than 10 hours in the semester in their placement. The idea was that they would experience a placement in the community that would so engage them, their curiosity, their interest, their wish to be good educators, that they would continue doing it, but they don't.
On their own?
On their own, essentially, to sign up a second time for $350. And that was one of the original conceptions, was this would be the mandatory one, and then they would sign up on their own. They're not. And again, that goes back to the I2 model of so many different courses that people are taking, that they're just running around all over the place.
So I want to talk a little bit about sort of I missed the authentic experience conversation before, but so my organization, Animal Advocates of Greater Lafayette, we got a grant from the Banfield Foundation, which is a big grant during the animal welfare area. So a few weeks ago, we have this program called People and Paws, Happy and Healthy Together. We're partnered with Area 4, Council on Aging, with most of you probably know, sort of low income and disabled people in the community. We partnered with vet offices, we're partnered with the College of Veterinary Medicine, and it's called Happy and Healthy Together. So people came and they got exams for their pets, vaccines for their pets, plus there was School of Nursing students there who did wellness checks for humans, and then we did family photos and we had supplies. Okay, so the model is that you can't really get low-income people. Sometimes if it's just for themselves, they won't come. But when you say, oh, come for your pet, they're like, oh, okay, we'll be there, right? All right, so people were there. So what was, I had 40 students from Purdue volunteering there. I had vet students, I'm the president of the organization. I had vet students, I had vet nursing students, I had School of Nursing students, and I had students from Cause for Pause, okay? This was an amazing educational, real experience for students, and there was one student from the College of Education who was part of Cause for Pause, and she's in my class, and that's why she was there. But these are the kind of experiences, the students who were there had an amazing time. And we couldn't even feed them because, as we explained, there were a lot of dogs. So we're really sorry, but there is no pizza, okay? Because that just was not a no-go. So, all they got was water. And they were there from, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of them were there till 5:30 or 6 when we were cleaning up and everything. And, I was there at 8 o'clock in the morning. But they got real experiences in this community that could be built on. But the thing is, there's no avenue to get College of Education students into any of the things my organization does, or a lot of the, so they end up doing very kind of like, little tasks or tutoring someone. It's not robust. And so I helped 40 Purdue students, and the only one was College of Education. Speaking at the School of Nursing, I speak all over campus about the organization. I get students involved, but there's no avenue for College of Education students.
See, the thing that I find so disheartening about that is that what you just described is compassion.
Yeah.
And for so many of those students, I'm certain that some of the students in nursing who are drawn to nursing out of a basic wellspring of compassion never imagined teaching as an expression of that compassion. And that's depressing.
So one of the things we're going to add, we've got a grant, so we're doing it 3 times, we're working on the March one. One thing we discovered was that when low-income people go in to see a vet, they don't know what to ask the vet, okay, about their pet. So we had scheduled 15-minute appointments, and they were only taking like 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so we're going to make them more people next time and more pets. But we also are going to have vet students talk with the people, but the undergrads talk with the people, but here are some things that you should ask the vet. Okay, so that's education. I mean, so much of what we do at our events, because I'm in education, are education. And it would be wonderful to have an avenue to involve College of Education students in real community experiences, not just through my organization, but in multiple ways.
If you do something like that in Hallville, for instance, in Indianapolis, partnering with community activists in Indianapolis, with young people in Indianapolis, it might change how people think about, oh, this is what I can do through the College of Education.
No, that's true. And there are, our grant is for Greater Lafayette, and also there are lots
I just think it's fantastic.
Absolutely, there are lots of organizations in Indy doing the kind of thing we do. I don't know how they do it. And I know generally how they do it, but aren't who they partner with. But you're right, those are the kind of things that could,
And then when a recruiter goes there and says, hey, have you thought about education? Well, now I am.
Right. So those are that's the kind of out of the box thinking I just feel like we need. It's not just going and talking to people and saying, come to the College of Education. It's being engaged in those communities in meaningful ways so that there is alignment, and thus they are seeing us as a place where they want to be.
Yeah, I don't think that when the I2 design happened that folks thought that why would somebody want to take 1,400 one-credit classes?
I
looked at,
exactly.
It's like there was no, I'm like,
Can you imagine being a student opening your Brightspace and seeing that? I would just.
I mean,
I would like to see my
primary point of feedback. It's an impossible ask. It's ridiculous.
My multicultural.
There's no time for the learning in this
meeting is now, so I'm gonna have to.
Thank you so much for joining us. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Nadine, please make sure you get.
Are there any other questions online or in the room?
Oh, Sunny Watson just posted for Nadine specifically, so apologies about that. She literally just posted. Is there a structure you have imagined for us to set up for encouraging our College of Ed students to engage in this type of community engagement? So is there a structure that could make that happen? I think that we kind of have been talking about that for quite a bit.
Does she mean like a organizational government structure for students to engage in those conversations or for faculty
Well,
and
hey,
students?
Sunny, I'll tell you what, if you could unmute yourself, we can hear you okay. Maybe you can speak more to it. Maybe we can engage with the people who are here about your question. If that's possible. If not, I can convey text comments.
I can talk. I have a very bad voice right now, but sorry. I have a really bad cough. I was just wondering. I mean, it was really for Nadine. What my question, if she had imagined, if it were possible, even with all those credit hours that 1 credit hours the students have to take, if there are any structural ways we could help these students engage in those type of community, efforts that Nadine was proposing. But, she left already. I was wondering if other people, like Crystal or Stephanie or had any thoughts because they know how we do things in the College of Ed.
I mean, it has to be a culture change and a bigger conversation about what we think the purpose of a college of education is and what we want it to be, right? I mean, I think like these kind of like, I mean, to Nadine's point, like, yeah, it'd be great to create like robust opportunities, but we have to have the culture that will sustain that, not just have like one person be able to do that. And so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, in my time here, 9 years, like we've never had a conversation, I don't think, about like, why are we here? Like, what are we doing? I mean, with I2, I mean, that would have been a space, but that wasn't what that became. Because I would do everything differently here. I mean, because again, like teacher education is one way to be an educator, but it's not the only way to be an educator. And, and I think that we lose a lot of students because they're like, well, if I'm not a teacher, what can I be? And like, you can get a degree in education and not do a teacher prep, but
Or learn some basic methodologies.
Yeah.
If I can step outside my role as the tech person for a second.
Yeah.
So I went to a Cub Scout meeting last night with my daughter. It was her first one. And they had 2 people trying to run the meeting. And it was kind of just telling the kids who are 5 years old at the end of a very long day of school, sit in your chairs and we're going to go through this worksheet together, workbook together, step by step. And it wasn't going anywhere. The kids were having a hard time. But then the first thing they were supposed to do was just kind of sit together and toss a ball to each other to introduce themselves to each other, which is a really exciting, engaging thing potentially. So we just said, hey, come on over. And the first thing we did was get out of the chairs and sit together on the floor in a circle and get the kids moving. And then we started the thing and tossed the ball to each other. And it worked for a little bit, but then one kid was like, well, what the heck with this? I'm just going to take this ball and go play with it myself. And so but then we made a segue because the next activity is supposed to be to do Simon Says, but to say Lion Says instead. It was like, Lion says, bark like a dog or something. And so it was really easy after that because all we did was just kind of say, I started with an example and it was very silly. And then I said to the next kid, okay, what's your lion says? And gave them the chance to engage. And so the kid said, lion says, crawl like a bear. So we all just got around and crawled like a bear. And everything after that flipped and they had a great time simply because we engaged with each other. We sat on the floor all together, saw them as people and gave them agency in the educational situation. And that kind of turned everything around. And all that came from were some very basic ideas about engagement, about student independent engagement and control over their own process. And just some empathy, as we've talked about already, about that they've already had a very long day. The last thing they want to do is more worksheets or filling things out. And it was a boring experience until then for 5-year-olds. So I think that was an educational experience. And so parents came afterwards and they're like, wow, that was so great. That went so well. They're like, it wasn't accessible to them as an idea, that tool set to engage with them in that way and create that educational experience. And so I think that as I hear all these great ideas, I think that there are all these wonderful opportunities to convey those basic ideas about education, how to engage and empathy and the rest. And it's a matter of because I'm a product of the College of Education. I have a master's degree in the college, and I went through part of the transition to teaching program. And the professional outcome, which was focused on the professional outcome, was to become a teacher in a classroom. And that wasn't the path that worked out for me. However, since my experience in the college, I've been equipped really well, and I'm grateful for it, to engage with young people in these different environments and in different outcomes to try to help them grow wherever they are. And I think that if it were accessible perhaps to more people, say for example, the parents who are supposed to be leading Scout meeting who didn't know what to do, God bless, because they were having a really hard time, I think that would be really helpful for them to understand that they could have access to the same things by interacting with the college. I suppose I could have said, hey, come to the College of Education, you'll learn lots about how to do this. But for them, that investment of time is simply inappropriate. They can't do that. But that's one educational experience that happened just yesterday.
Thank you for sharing that. I think
Sure.
it goes to show two things. One, the possibility of what we can do as a college of education, expanding our offering to folks, but also two, the power of what we have done and preparing you with skill set that you can use outside of a classroom. Absolutely. That has benefited not only your community and your children, but I think our college community as well.
And there is a question now online from Hiri. I'm a doctoral candidate in the program of educational psychology, and I'm highly interested in working with the pre-service teachers. As I grow as a scholar, I'm also interested in working with in-service teachers. At the pre-service teacher stage, I think the diversity and equity philosophy taught in the teacher education program has a great impact on their perceptions. At the in-service teacher level, I think what they have learned in the teacher education program can change due to many barriers in the school or district environment. What advice would you give to a scholar who is interested in working with in-service teachers, e.g. research, professional development, to meet where they are and promote positive changes? How do people who are already teaching?
Who wants to take that one? Anyone?
I would recommend that you start by reading Carter G. Woodson and thinking about, Woodson's obviously talking about, filling gaps in the teaching of Black history, but you could certainly use that as a model for, how to help empower in-service teachers to think about ways to supplement what, I don't know, is Common Core still a thing?
It's to some degree, we call it Common Core Light. So, yeah, what some states did, they just took Common Core and took it off the name and just put their state standards.
Well, to simply supplement what standardized curriculum don't cover. That would be one suggestion.
And then another one would be she brought up a great point that yes, when we have teacher candidates within our programs, they become well-versed in what we provide them to say, to think richly about diversity. But when they go out into the field, into their own classroom, that there's a whole confluence of events or impacts or factors that can change what they may have discovered about themselves in teacher education programs. And so when you go into the field, you deal with in-service teachers who are and you want to do some research with them, you've got to be able, again, to break down what are their beliefs at that stage in their career and what is their teacher identity at that stage in their career. They have been repackaged, repurposed to think according to whatever district or community environment that they're working in. They may see diversity or issues of social justice vastly different because now they may be in an environment that does not view those things as being positive or are valid topics to discuss. And so therefore, their whole mindset will change. It's almost like, you hate to say that old statement or saying, when in Rome, we do as the Romans. That's pretty much what teachers do when they go into a new setting. They will do what happens or is occurring in that setting. So you've got to be mindful of that. It's almost like you have to go back to that very basic of addressing the teacher belief system and their teacher identity and how they have crafted that once they became an actual teacher in a classroom. Other questions? Well, I'm going to wrap up, but I do thank you all for participating in this panel session. I hope that the questions and the topic was fruitful. I think that from what we have heard today, our college and our university can do more work in this area and their response to the recent decision. The question is going to be who will lead the charge, or not so much who will lead the charge. It has to be organic. It has to come from the bottom up to move institutions into the positive direction. So I do encourage those who are online and those who are in the room to think more deeply about this decision from the Supreme Court and how it might impact your teaching, our recruitment efforts in the college, and just teacher education writ large. Because I think it's going to be, we're going to see more bumps rather than success stories going forward with teacher preparation programs than what we've seen before. We know the dismal numbers when it comes to diversity in the profession, but I think that this is going to have some undue influence. I think the ideas presented today can give us different ways to reach communities that we have not been successful at reaching for almost 50 and 60 years, okay? Again, thank you all. There is lunch in the back. Please take a lunch with you and some water. And I do wish you a wonderful Friday, all right?
Thank you. And lots of
Thank
thanks.
you.
Lots of thanks coming from online.
Oh, now?
Oh, no, there's
Oh,
saying thank you.
thanks. Oh,
Thanks, yeah,
okay,
no, I understand.
okay. I
Lots of
thought you meant
thanks.
questions, like, no.